Hello students, good morning to all of you. Welcome to this virtual class. We are discussing that simultaneous changes both demand and supply. We have already discussed if both demand and supply increases in the same proportions, then we concluded what is the effect. Effect is that price will remain same and that quantity will increase. Similarly, if both demand and supply decreases in the same proportions, price will remain same and quantity decreases. Already we have already discussed. And similarly, we have already discussed when increase in supply is more than increase in demand and decrease in supply is more than decrease in demand. So today we will start when decrease in demand is more than decrease in supply. What is the effects of price and quantities? Today's analysis is when decrease in demand is more than decrease in supply. Simultaneously changes. Decrease in demand is more than decrease in supply. Yes, students, draw the diagram. We have already known O x-axis quantity of demand of X goods and quantity of supply of X goods. And O y-axis represent the price of X goods. And we have already known DD is the demand curve and SS is the supply curve. We have already known. And E is the equilibrium points. OP is the equilibrium price and OQ is the equilibrium quantities. This is the condition what we have already known. Now suppose as per our question, when decrease in demand is more than decrease in supply. When decrease in demand is more than decrease in supply, it means demand decreases more than that of decrease in supply. And previously we have already known the decrease in demand curve which shifts towards the left side. Decrease in demand curve which shifts towards the left side. So I will draw that decrease in demand curve. So D2 is the decrease in demand curve. That I will write here. D2 is the decrease in demand curve. Okay. And decrease in supply, which supply will decrease. Decrease in demand is more than decrease in supply. What will the shape of supply curve whenever it decreases? Either it is the towards shift toward the right or toward the left. So I will draw the decrease in supply curve S2 is the decrease in supply curve. Now S2 is the decrease in supply curve here, and that intersect at that E2 points. So E2 is the equilibrium point where D2 decrease in demand curve intersects to S2 decrease in supply curve. Clear? but decrease in demand is more than the decrease in supply. So as a result of, we got that equilibrium point and equilibrium price. So how much will be the equilibrium price? When we draw that perpendicular lines toward that OY axis, that is OP2 is the price. Similarly, whenever we draw the line toward that X axis, that is that Q2 is the equilibrium quantities. So now OP2 is the equilibrium price and OQ2 is the equilibrium quantity. OP2 is the equilibrium price and OQ2 is the equilibrium quantities. So now, what is the effect of the price and quantities? Conclusions. That we may write here, conclusion or effects. Price decreases. Number one, price decreases, because from this table we come to know that OP2 is less than OP, and number two, quantity decreases, that is OQ2 is less than OQ. So if the question comes, when decrease in demand is more than decrease in supply, what is the effect of the price and quantity? The price decreases and quantity also decreases. Now it is clear. Simultaneous change both demand and supply. Similarly, when increase in supply is more than increase in demand. Next, when increase in supply is more than increase in demand. When increase in supply is more than increase in demand. Increase in supply is more than increase in demand. Now I will draw that diagram. O x-axis, quantity of demand of X goods and quantity of supply of X goods, and OY axis is that price of X goods. SS is the supply curve and DD is the demand curve. E is the equilibrium points, OP is the equilibrium price, OQ is the equilibrium quantities. It is clear, is the basic normal things. Then the question comes, when increase in supply is more than increase in demand. We have already known increase in supply means the supply curve shifts toward the right. Increase in supply means the supply curve shifts toward the right. So let be that S1 is the increase in supply curve. So write down S1 is the increase in supply curve, and increase in demand D1 is the increase in demand curve. D1 increase in demand curve. Now E1 is the equilibrium point. E1 is the equilibrium point where D1 increase in demand curve intersects to S1 increase in supply curve as per our diagram. Clear? So after that, you draw that perpendicular line toward that OY axis. This is that OP1. Similarly, draw that perpendicular toward that X axis. This is the Q1. So now you may write here OP1 is that equilibrium price and OQ1 is that equilibrium quantity. Similarly, the conclusion you may write conclusion effect number 1, price decreases, that is as OP1 is less than OP as per our diagram, and number 2, quantity increases. Because OQ1 is greater than OQ. So this is the effects, price decreases and quantity increases. It means if demand and supply will be changed simultaneously, and this changes when that supply, increase in supply will be more than that of increase in demand, in that case the price will decrease and quantity will increase. Quantity of both demand and supply will increase. This is the effects when that increase in supply is more than increase in demand. Increase in supply is more than increase in demands. Similarly, when increase in supply is less than increase in demand, next, when increase in supply is less than increase in demand. When increase in supply is less than increase in demand. Increase in supply is less than increase in demand. Draw the lines OX axis and OY axis. This is that OX axis, quantity of demand of X goods and quantity of supply of X goods. OX represented that price of X goods, and this is that supply curve, and this is that demand curve. We have already known supply curve move upwards from left to right, demand curve slope downwards from left to right, and E is that equilibrium point, and OP is the equilibrium price, and OQ is the equilibrium quantity. This is known. Now, as per our question, when increase in supply is less than increase in demand, increase in supply is less than increase in demand. This is the increase in supply. S1 is the increase in supply. S1 is the increase in supply curve. Less, it means increase in demand will be more. Increase in demand will be more. D1 increase in demand. D1 increase in demand. So E1 is the equilibrium points. D1 is that increase in demand curve, and E1 is that equilibrium point where increase in supply curve S1 intersects to increase in demand curve DD T1 D1. Now U1 is the equilibrium point. So we'll draw that perpendicular line towards that x-axis and towards that y-axis. So if I'll draw that toward that y-axis where it intersects that y-axis, that given that Q1, and similarly when it intersects to that y-axis, this is given as that P1. So from this diagram, now we can say that OP1 is that equilibrium price and OQ1 is that equilibrium quantity. Now we draw that conclusion, or what is the effects? First effect is that price increases. Number one, price increases because OP1 is greater than OP, and number two, quantity also increases. That is OQ1 is greater than OQ. OQ1, which is that greater than OQ. So conclusion is that when price increases in supply is less than increase in demand, then that price increases and quantity also increases. Both price and quantity increases. Clear? Next, we'll start when decrease in demand is more than decrease in supply. When the demand increase is equal to demand supply decrease, it is all done. When demand decreases is equal to supply increases, then what will the effects? Now next, all things we have already discussed. Both demand and supply changes, but another thing that one increases, another decreases. One increases, another decreases. It means demand increases and supply decreases. What will the effect? When demand increases, supply decreases. What will the effects? When demand decreases and supply increases in same proportions. In same proportion, ध्यान रखिए. How much percentage demand changes, that much percentage also supply changes. Mean how much percentage demand decreases, that much percentage supply also increases. What will the effect? Think it. Demand decreases. Now initial stages, OX-axis represents the quantity of demand of X goods and quantity of supply of X goods, and Y-axis represents the price of X goods. BC. This is that supply curve. SS is the supply curve, we have already known, and DD is the demand curve, we have already known. E is the equilibrium point. OP is the equilibrium price, and OQ is the equilibrium quantity. We have already known this much. OP is the equilibrium price and OQ is the equilibrium quantity. Clear? when demand decreases, suppose demand decreases. If the demand decreases, it means it shifts towards the left. When demand decreases, it means it shifts towards the left. Demand decreases. D2 is the demand decreases. Demand decreases D2. Now I'll write here. D2 is the decrease in demand curve. Our question is that when demand decreases, supply increases. Suppose any goods, the demands whenever decreasing, this is the purely imaginary, and supply increases. Demand decreases, supply increases in some proportion. And supply increases means it shifts toward the right sides. Towards the right sides. S is the supply curve. Increase in supply curve, that is that S1 which will be that increase in supply curve. S1 is the increase in supply curve. Here. Or both this intersect at the point of E. E point में दोनों intersect कर रहे हैं. So now I may write here E1 is the equilibrium point. This is that E1 is the equilibrium point, at which point D2 decrease in demand curve and S1 increase in the supply curve intersect each other. That I write where D2 decrease in demand curve intersects to S1 increase in supply curve. Here D2 decrease in demand curve intersect S1 increase in supply curve. What is the effect now of the price and quantities? So whenever is the equilibrium points, now equilibrium price is that OP2 let be and quantity OQ. Now write down OP2 is that equilibrium price. Whenever we draw that perpendicular line towards that y-axis, this is that OY axis, then where it intersects to that OY axis, namely that P2, so that is to be called that equilibrium price. So I write here OP2 is the equilibrium price. And what is the equilibrium quantity? OQ is that equilibrium quantity. OQ is the equilibrium quantity. So what is the conclusion now? Conclusion or effect. Number 1, price decreases. That is OP2 is less than OP. And number 2, quantity remains same. What was the previous OK? Let now is also OK. So quantity remains same. So what are the changes now? Changes is that only price decreases and quantity remains same. Here. So when demand decreases and supply increases in same proportions, that price decreases and quantity remains same. Price decreases, quantity remains same. Next, when demand increases and supply decreases. Next is when demand increases and supply decreases. Demand increases and supply decreases. In same proportions. In same proportions. When demand increases and supply decreases in that same proportion, what is the effect of price and quantity? Now I'll draw the diagram. X-axis and Y-axis. Quantity of demand of X goods and quantity of supply of X goods. Y-axis is the price of X goods. And similarly, SS is the supply curve and DD is the demand curve. E is the equilibrium point, OP is the equilibrium price, and OQ is the equilibrium quantity. These are the given. Up to this much it is clear. We'll discuss when demand increases. Demand increases means it will shift toward the right. Demand increases means it will shift toward the right. Demand increases. So D1 is the increase in demand curve. Demand increases and supply decreases. Demand increases and supply decreases. Supply decreases means it will shift towards the left in the same proportions. S1, S2, S2. Clear? Now I'll write here D1 is the increase in demand curve. And S2 is the decrease in supply curve. Clear? And both increase in demand curve and decrease in supply curve intersect at the point of E1. Now I will draw that line toward that y-axis from that equilibrium point. Okay. Now this is that suppose OP1. And I will draw that line toward that x-axis perpendicular line from that E1 point. See it? So I will write here E1 is that equilibrium point where D1 increase in demand curve intersects to S1 decrease in supply curve. clear. D1 increase in demand curve, S2 decrease in supply curve intersects at point E1. So OP1 is that equilibrium price and OQ is that equilibrium quantity. OP1 is the equilibrium price and OQ is the equilibrium quantity. It means, what is the effect here? It means price increases. Previous price was OP, and latest price after the increase in demand and decrease in supply, the price increases OP to OP1, and the quantity which was initial stage OQ, that is remains same here. So in this case, it means conclusion we may write here, that conclusion. One, price increases. Price increases, and number that is as per our OP1 is greater than OP as per our diagram. And number two, quantity remain same, because previously it was OQ and now also it is OQ after the changes in demand and supply, or after that increase in demand and decrease in supply, so that equilibrium quantity is OQ, so OQ is that remaining quantity, so that quantity remains same and price increases, because previous price was OP and latest price is that OP1 after that increase in demand and decrease in supply. So it means when that demand increases and supply decreases in the same proportions, the price increases and quantity remains same. But when demand decreases and supply increases in same proportion, at that time price decreases, quantity remains same. Just reverse. Okay. When demand increases, supply decreases in same proportion, that time price increases, quantity remains same. But previously I was discussed, when demand decreases and supply increases in the same proportion, price decreases, quantity remains same. So now it is clear. All this, I think, finish of the simultaneous change in demand and supply. So there is no doubt, I think, as per our diagrams and that explanation is concerned. So I think this chapter is finished. Next we will discuss that some tools of these topics. What are the tools we will discuss? That is that chapter name may be that support price, simple application of demand and supply. Simple application of demand and supply. Then your chapter will be finished and microeconomics will be finished. Thanks to all of you.